Welcome to this episode of Insights with Ovationz. I'm your host, Aaron Ellis. Today, I am joined with Karen Zeigler. Now, Karen brings over 20 years of experience dedicated to empowering leaders and innovating organizational change. By redesigning the way executives and leaders develop change, Karen helps to create an engaging employee experience, bringing positive and sustainable impact to the organization's financial performance. I can't wait to dive into that, actually. She's also a founding member of the Octopus movement, where nonlinear thinking is leading to groundbreaking solutions in today's complex world. Karen, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for having me. Excited about our conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, we got to know each other a little bit beforehand and stuff, but I'm excited to ask you a few questions because I saw some real similarities and synergies in us, obviously with the Octopus movement and stuff, and me talking about my autism and stuff. But I like to hear the bridge and the path that somebody's been on that's led to where they are. And I did pull something out of one of the things I read that where you said since you were a kid, you had a desire to make things better, fast, and easier for people. So I'd love if we could start there or start with what led you to what you're doing today. And obviously that desire is part of it. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, when I was little, it actually landed me in a lot of trouble with my grandmother and my teachers. But I always had this, and I don't know, I guess you would call it intuition or just eyesight for the challenge and what was behind the challenge. And so being able to see that so clearly at such a young age, I always wanted to interject my innovative ideas on how, we could avoid this problem, or we could redesign the way we were doing things to eliminate the problem. And it never was really met that well as a child. And even when I first got into the corporate world, I was seen as a little rebel, if you will, with always challenging the status quo. And it wasn't until much later in life that I realized that part of that is an innate skill of design thinking and how we can question and empathize with others and really find what the core need is behind the problem and redefine it and deconstruct what's happening and reconstruct a better and more innovative solution. So yeah, it's been a pattern throughout my life, actually.
You just mentioned, which I love that you mentioned this. You talked about looking at the core need or issue behind a problem. You mentioned empathy. And I know that when I've done, work with companies and whatnot, and partially it's the way our society is brought up and the way our brains are basically trained to look at the problems, and look at the symptoms and whatnot. But you brought that up, like going deeper and finding the core issues in a problem. Can you explain on some of those issues that you've been able to identify and how you help organizations identify them and move through them, and obviously bring in any kind of resistance you've had to that? And I've had it, so I'm curious on your resistance to that as well. If maybe we've already always done it that way, and changing paradigms is where I'm headed here.
Yeah, well, one of the paradigms that organizations need to change is the polarities they see, right? Work from home, for example, employers are on this side saying you got to be in the office. Employees are over here saying, I want to work from home. And we think that that's all there is, right? And we spend all of our time and energies battling our position rather than really getting behind what that means to each of them, to the leaders and to the employees. Because what happens is, and I have a diagram I often use, which I'll try and do with my fingers here, but we have the needs of the employees. So, right, they want to work from home. That's just the physical, what's going to happen. But there are needs behind why they want that and why they're clinging so hard to it. And same on the employer side with the work in the office there. That's just the physical piece of it. There are actual needs behind it for leaders. And so they're not digging deep enough in their own worlds, much less anyone else's world, the other side's world, to find out what the real needs are and where they overlap. And what I love, I'm kind of old school, as you could probably tell, but Zig Ziglar had a quote, and I never really understood it until I began teaching design thinking principles. And his quote that I always loved, but I thought it meant totally something else in my first career, is that you can help enough people get what they want. If what you can get everything you need if you help enough other people get what they need.
Right.
And the way I see that is we have the need of the employee and we have the need of the employer. And if we can dig deep enough, we will see that there's a spot where they overlap, where their need is our resource and our resource is their need. And if we can dig deep enough into that and find that overlap, that's the sweet spot where everybody's happy, everybody's needs gets met. And I just find that design thinking is a great tool for finding that sweet spot.
I completely agree. And you brought up a topic that is still a very relevant topic and companies are grappling with. It's the whole working from home, the virtual environment as opposed to coming in. I've had people, come to me and talk to me that they're very, like you said, polarized on one side of the table. And I'm curious on how you help them see the other side of the table. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people are focused on, it's not necessarily that they're being victims, but they're coming from a victim mentality where this is what I want and I need and I deserve, but they're not framing it in a way. They're not able to put themselves in the other person's shoes per se, right? And I love being able to create winners on both sides of the table. So I'm curious on what you're doing to be able to do that, to cultivate that kind of collaboration and cooperation where a lot of times it can be very polarized.
Yeah. And polarization, victim mindset, it's all part of this scarcity mindset, really, right? Because if there's competition, the polarities, then I can't have what I want unless they don't get what they want, right? That's the scarcity mindset. But abundance mindset says there's a way that we can both get what we need here. And I think the first step, and why, I think design thinking is called human-centered design for that reason, is you're looking at the whole human. So how can you begin to look at the whole human? And I call those three parts body, mind, and spirit. It could be physical, mental, emotional. It could be, hands, heart, and head, however you want to look at it. Right. But you have to look at all three layers, because the reason there's a fight is you're only looking at what's happening in the physical world. I want you here. I want to be here. That's all there is to it. But there's a lot more to it. There's thoughts that go behind each of those scenarios. There's also who are these people being states, or what some people call the heart or the spirit, or whatever you want to call it. So who is it that, the work from home crowd wants to be, right? More free in their schedule. Maybe they want to be more autonomous. There are being things that they want to have happen that really have nothing to do with their location, right? You can be free to set your schedule wherever you work, in an office, at home, in an airport, on your way to the next client. You can be autonomous in any place. The being states go with us wherever we are. And so if we can dig down through all three of those layers, then we begin to see the whole human, and we can begin to understand the needs behind these polarities and find out where they intersect and how we can both do better. I love the way you just explained that. Like, that was like, make a note. How many minutes in are we? I don't know. Really rewind 2 minutes and listen to that, because that was very, very clear and articulate. Now, where are you primarily intersecting with companies? What level are you usually bringing this design thinking in? Well, the beauty of the way I teach design thinking and like to interact with leaders is it's applicable at any level. Obviously, there's Gartner research, Design Management Institute research, and even McKinsey and Company research that says the C-suite are starting to pursue design thinking more and more because of its creative problem-solving abilities. But there's no one who needs creative problem-solving more than the frontline manager, right? They got zero budget, zero resources, zero authority really to do anything. They have all the constraints that make creativity thrive. Why not give them this tool to help make their life easier and help their team succeed better? So, I like the top-down approach, the teach the teacher approach. Start with the C-suite, have them not only learn it, as I teach it, but also then go and teach it to the next level and have them implement it. So I do a really back and forth manner of train the trainer approach so that it infiltrates the whole organization. It really doesn't take as long as most people would think when you do it that way.
Right. I love that you said it doesn't take as long as people think when you do it that way, because that leads to my next question. And part of it is I'm curious on how you've helped companies move this along, or you've moved it along. And even if I go back 20 years, when some of the concepts that I was going in and teaching, that I was getting deer in the headlights, or like the dog, like, they turn their head, like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Right. But
Yeah.
I'm finding people are more and more receptive. And one of the ways that I've been able to do that, not necessarily as left-brained and statistical as a lot of people as a lot of the organizations like, but in a way with testimonials and companies I've worked with. But I'm curious, leading to my question, how are you bringing that sustainable impact to their financial performance? How are you connecting this to ROI for them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I teach design thinking, we start with the vision. And people think, oh, but now I can go use AI to write my vision statement in 2 seconds or whatever. No, you can't, because more than likely your vision is not human centered. It's very ego centered. And when it is not human centered, you have already misaligned everybody in your organization because they don't know how to execute the job you've given them because they're not clear on the vision, because really it's all about the ego of the company, not necessarily any particular leader, but it's not about the work that's being done. And so there's already this disconnect between the vision and the work I do. And so you're setting, you're already slowing down the success of the process when it's not human centered.
So can you elaborate on how you define vision?
Yeah, vision, very much like what we just talked about with the polarity, needs to have all those elements. It needs to have a physical element. It needs to have a mental element to it. It needs to have a being state, a spiritual element, heart element to it. I taught this in an online course, Design Thinking for Leaders, but we went over 4 different visions: Disney, IKEA, and someone else that didn't do a good job. I can't think of their name at the moment. And then Starbucks. And regardless of what you think of Starbucks, out of the 4 vision statements that we went over, they had the clearest human-centered vision, because it was like with every cup, with every conversation, in every community, we create connection or something to that regard. You had the physical, what was happening, what was happening with this person they wanted to embody. What were the mental pictures? Whether we like Starbucks coffee or not, we all have an image that comes to mind when we sit down to have a cup of coffee with someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the heart space, the being state, they are creating community, they are creating connection, so that in their vision, they've embodied the whole human. And it's interesting, most of the other vision statements that we reviewed in that class, it's all about being a global this or a global that, or how many companies they had, or their talent, where their story, one was Disney and they were the storytelling genius. It was nothing about what people experience with Disney or what you want people to experience with Disney. It was all about Disney. And, the conversation was, no wonder they're having so much turmoil in the last year, because their vision statement was not human-centered at all.
I absolutely love that. I think vision statement, mission statement, there's so much confusion in that. And when I've worked with companies or entrepreneurs, I love working with startups, like I mentioned. A lot of people don't understand. I ask for their vision statement and they give me a mission statement, or they give me a strategy. I'm like, well, that's not your vision. And I think you hit on that. It's like the experience level. And one of the things that I've found, and I'm curious on if this is something you do as well, but when we can dial in that vision from the top down, then for me, and this is similar to what I mentioned to you before we started recording, I want to understand your vision. Because if I can find the intersection of our 2 visions, then our missions doesn't necessarily matter. I can help elevate your mission and elevate my mission, because we're going for the same vision. I can find the similarities of what our vision is, right? So if we can go top down with that, what I've done with companies, I'm curious if this is in your process too, is the way to have a thriving company, and this goes into what I would call culture. And I use the air quotes because a lot of times when I go into companies and speak culture, they're like, that's not what we expected you to say about culture. So
Yeah.
I'm talking about when you can have a culture where everybody is literally buying into the vision of the company. And the way that's done is the visionaries of the company are understanding the vision of the employees, and they're matching the visions, and they're helping them. They're helping them feel it. They're helping them connect the essence of the cooperative vision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you speak towards that and what you do there, and any processes
What,
or any tools you use, or whatever comes to mind? I'd love to hear it.
yeah. Well, let me speak a little bit more on the Starbucks issue, which I was kind of used as an example throughout the whole class. Now, think about that vision I shared with you that Starbucks had. Now, if you're a barista at Starbucks, can you help facilitate that? Absolutely. If that's your vision and you work in accounting in Starbucks, can you facilitate that? Absolutely. There's no one in that organization that can't look at that vision and go, I know how I can impact that. And when people in positions in your organization go, I know how my job impacts that, then obviously you're going to be performing at a higher level, right? Than people that go, I'm just doing whatever they asked me to do today, whatever that is. Does it align with the vision? I don't know. But that is, what my passion is about. How do we take, the vision and then connect the people and the policies and the procedures and everything to it? Because when all those are aligned, that's what creates the success. Because and I'm a big believer in the obstacle is the way also. Because when you sit down and you talk with leaders or you talk with your employees, if you're a team leader, about this is our vision and it's very clear. We agree that it's very clear. What are the obstacles keeping us from it, right? And so these obstacles start popping up. That's the define the problem stage in design thinking. And so as a leader, that's our job, is to remove obstacles so our employees can do the work and achieve the vision. So when we begin to do that, obstacles are being removed left and right. What do? We get to our vision much, much faster. And quite frankly, with a lot more creativity and fun, which improves employee experience, engagement, innovation so much. I have a infographic of the 5 stages of design thinking, and you think about vision, but when you practice vision, there's like 5 to 10, I think, skills that you're upgrading with your leaders. When they practice empathy and design thinking, there's there's another 10 skills they're upskilling. It seems like a simple 5 steps process, but it's not a box checking thing. It's really a skills and development thing. When I first did it more intuitively than anything in the beginning, I would say I was practicing empathy, but I was far from empathetic. But the more I've practiced it, the more empathetic I've become. And so all the skills that you develop in those 5 phases, which are many, are practices that leaders can take in any job they do within their organization, or if they leave and go somewhere else. It's just such a transformative skill on every level. The leaders' practice of it, their engagement with employees of it, what happens at the company level. It's just transformative, in my opinion.
Wow. So we only have a little bit of time left, but what I'd love to do in the little bit of time we have left is see if we can connect some dots for people here. So we talked about some great things. We talked about literally your path to wanting to make things better, faster, and easier. You can see the struggle. We talked about that and how we can see the way through things and whatnot. People who are listening and to this podcast, they go back and listen. I recommend always go back and listen again. How can they connect the dots for themselves? Because typically companies are in a reactive state. So what have you seen, or what are some areas where a company could say, hey, we're struggling with this, and that means we need to talk to Karen. We need some, basically what you do. How can we connect the dots for them based on struggle?
What I find in teaching, and the way that I teach, the train the trainer approach and the subsequent steps approach that I take, leaders not only, okay, I come to week one, I learn about vision, I learn what it means to have a human-centered vision, maybe even learn where my vision is off, veered off and drifted. But now I go back to my team and I implement what I've just learned in week one. So there's the implementation phase, and then there's the teaching phase. Not only are they trying to implement it with their team, but they're also, if you're starting with the C-suite, asking those, you're teaching those leaders and asking them to teach the next level of leadership down. So there's multiple layers of learning there, right? They didn't just hear, they went and applied, but they also went and taught, which is the greatest form of learning, is teaching. So,
Yes.
and so we come back to week two. We come back for week two. They get some coaching on maybe this approach is new to them. So what felt off, didn't work, needed some more clarity around it. Get some coaching around week one and what happened when they began to implement it and teach it. Then they learn step two, and we repeat the process over and over again until, so they have gotten that learning at various levels, the listening, the applying, and the teaching. Then they begin to coach the leaders that they've taught in a new way, because that process is happening for them just as it happened with me with them as the students. So
yeah, that's beautiful. I completely understand that whole process and how teaching is a massive part of learning. Like I've always brought to people, and even in my own life, anywhere I've leveled up or any struggles I've gone through, as soon as I start teaching people what I've gone through, or I even teach it while I'm going through it, I'm a whole message kind of person. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
We're basically,
and I guess one thing I missed in answering your question is how do they grasp this? There's a real ebb and flow to design thinking there. And I find that you are in a flow state much more often, because there's the learning, there's the reflecting, there's the doing. There's we have a receiving part and we have a giving part. That's ebb and flow, right? And it's a more natural state. It's a more intentional state than that go philosophy that has so many people worn out and really doing all the wrong things, but in fast fashion, right? They're doing them, but they're doing them fast.
Very true. Well, I love this. I think there's a lot of great insights here that everybody should go back and listen to again, because we kind of went all over, but I think you and I understand how to go all over and come back to where we started. But is there any final thought you would want to leave? Any final thing you'd like to share before we say goodbye today?
It's the future of leadership. I have a whole series on this, but we know that manager as boss is no longer applicable. There are a few instances where we can command and control. There are very few, but it's a gone leadership practice. Leadership as coach is still effective, but as we saw in the pandemic, leadership as coach is all about, okay, here's the goal. Yes, there's multiple paths to get to the goal, and I will coach you along till you get to it. That is not the case, and the pandemic showed us. The goal may be one thing one day, and tomorrow may be something different, right? The goal is it's not as concrete as it once was. And I don't think we're going to go back from that. And that's why leadership by design, I believe, is the future of leadership, because it's designing the vision, not necessarily to any specific goal, because they're always going to change, but it's designing the vision that you want to see. And it's giving leaders the tool to do that.
I love that. Very, very well said, and very, very good ending to this talk today. Karen, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being on. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. That's been another episode of Insights with Ovationz. We'll see you next time.